Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Art of Making. Guys, when is it too late to say Happy New Year? I know it's already February when you'll be hearing this, but it's the very first episode of The Art of Making in 2025. So we're very excited to see you back here. And if it's the first time that you tune in, do not forget to check out the previous 12 episodes that we released last year. There are some real gems for you in there. But today I'm joined by Sandra Horlings and Christiaan Kraaijenhagen of InnoBoost. They're dialing into our digital studio from the Netherlands. Sandra and Christiaan are experts in circularity, which has been an important topic for the last years, if not the last decades, but maybe even more topical at the time of this recording, now that many big corporations are reducing or even outright scrapping their ESG targets due to geopolitical and ideological shifts going on right now. Nevertheless, I do have the feeling that we see these major shifts and the awareness and direction of towards more sustainability also in manufacturing is staying. Sandra, Christiaan, when is it really too late to say Happy New Year?
Well, it's never too late. Let's say a happy start of your circular year.
Yeah.
That's a nice one. I like that one.
Start now.
Fantastic.
Every day.
Yeah, it was also Lunar New Year just recently. I realized we're not celebrating that much here in Europe, but nevertheless. But anyway, at some point it has to be bad luck to say Happy New Year or something like that. Talking about luck, actually, I ate a fortune cookie today. I don't usually do this when we're recording these episodes, but I have it here. The fortune cookie said, hang on, there will be great changes, but you will be very happy. There we go. So let's see if we can unlock some great changes for circularity in manufacturing today. Sandra, Christiaan, I'm really excited to have you here. And let's dive into the topic of circularity, which is why our listeners are tuning in. As you both know, of course, for centuries, companies have also, or specifically, maybe even in manufacturing, have followed a take, make, waste kind of model. But there's one study by the UN Trade and Development that suggests that circular business models could actually unlock $4.5 trillion in economic benefits and create 7 million jobs by 2030. So much potential value at stake, we should probably understand what a circular business model is. So how, from your experience, how would you define a circular business model, and what sets it apart from a traditional linear, this kind of take, make, waste model?
Oh, you start with the easy question.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
We'll fill our hour.
Do you want the academic definition or practical
both.
one? With the academical. So a circular business model is about innovating to create what we call superior value propositions. So value propositions for your customers, but also for other people. We come back to that. And what we add to that, and that makes the real difference. And we would like to what we call slow loops. We would like to narrow loops. We would like to close loops. Traditional circular, and even if possible we would also like to generate resource loops by using renewable energy and also creating benefits for the natural environment, and what we would like to add, also societal benefits.
So that's the practical one.
Whole line. And now the practical one.
Super.
I would say it's a business model in where you prevent doing harm and indeed actively restore and improve the world around us as a business being a force for good.
That sounds like a marketing definition a bit more.
Indeed, but that's my background. And I also, as Christiaan was saying, we always look for the benefits of going circular for whoever is involved in a supply chain. And indeed, as Christiaan was saying, there are several circular strategies. Eliminating waste, making products in a way that you can use them longer, or that they use less materials, or making them in a way that we can reuse them again or repurpose them again. So all these strategies are out there, but I think in essence, it's about understanding that if you go back to your take, make, waste model, if you say, okay, we know that's a dead-end street, we know that that's leading to climate change, to very scarce resources not being available anymore, for inequalities around the world, going in and thinking in circles and saying, okay, how can we design a new system? And that's the overarching, maybe the marketing term, but the overarching aim is to really build a system in where we can restore or regenerate the world around us.
Yeah. So if you say, I do have a bit the manufacturing lens here, of course. You say restore, regenerate. In manufacturing terms, it would probably be remanufacturing or maybe refurbishing. Not quite the same here.
Yeah,
Can you share maybe?
use, yeah,
Please,
if
yeah.
I can add, also use, if you really look at from a manufacturing, it's about input and output and throughput. But if you make it very simple, you could say the input of materials, so not using, let's say, virgin materials, but use renewable or bio-based materials or materials that are already used. And then you make it quite simple in that looking from a manufacturing perspective.
Can you maybe share a real-world example of companies leading this transformation?
It's always hard to go mention companies in our work, as we what we do is all let's say innovative, and we're bound to non-disclosure agreements.
Of course.
What we see is around us that quite some industries, like in textiles, in electronics, also in automotive, in health, food, they're leading examples, and we can highlight a few ones that are published, of course, and there's a lot of things happening there. But what we see, and that's an interesting one, it's very much focused also from a manufacturing point of view on what we call eco-efficiency, or being compliant to what we have to do, legal and regulatory stuff. And where we would challenge, and that's also coming back to your questions, who's leading, who are going beyond that? So who take the responsibility beyond that? And there we could give some examples.
Yeah. No, if you want to share one, it would be amazing. Without violating any non-disclosure agreements, of course.
Sandra,
Well, I
which
think
one
an easy
shall
one
we
could
talk?
be, yeah, an easy one in textiles could be EcoAlpha. So they take, for instance, the abandoned fish nets from the ocean, and that's no secret for whomever is involved. And then they use that to make jackets from, instead of that whole, whereas challenged on recycled PET. But you could say they are cleaning part of the environment and using that materials as a source to create something of value for people. So that's what we. That's an example of regenerating, so cleaning the oceans by still assuring that we have something like a warm and comfortable jacket to wear during the winter time. And I think also there is some biomaterials, some companies are experiencing with biomaterials that's already on the market. Some manufactured goods, they have like a frame or part of it that's being used, that's out there.
Yeah. That's either taking natural ingredients, quote unquote, natural materials, or really taking something that is considered waste. In this case, say plastics from the ocean. Yeah.
And also, if we could add renewable energy, so powered by renewable energy.
Yeah. Yeah, that tends to be one that is easily forgotten, of course. If the energy that's coming in is coming from sources that are not very clean, then your efforts may be in vain. Or almost in vain.
Yeah.
I read about an example in the automotive industry, ironically maybe, recently. In France, Renault has a relatively new factory. It's called the Refactory, where they're taking some components of old Renault cars, so from the dealerships, when something's broken, engine for example, and they basically inverted their entire production line. So instead of assembling the engines, they disassemble it, find out what is wrong, they fix it, and in the end you have an almost brand new engine. So this is a type of remanufacturing that's already possible today. So we're not reinventing the wheel here, apparently.
I don't think the challenge is reinventing the wheel. I think a lot of strategies are already feasible, but they compete either with really cheap virgin materials. So then you have to think of a business case to make it work. Or, and that's interesting on the Renault case that you share, it's typically not in the scope of the manufacturer to collect the reused engines and then take them apart again. and refurbish them or repurpose them. So that implies that you need to set up a new supply chain, and you have to work with different partners. And so we see that maybe the challenge is not so much in the concept, and so we can all conceptualize what would it look like, but then in making it happen and getting the arguments right for the investments in the early stage now, to say, okay, we know that that's the direction that we're heading in. And indeed, you see some of these leading corporates saying we would like to transition the system. So we know that we can only thrive in a system that supports itself. We also know that there are investment needed and that we need to do that with partners. But then it's where it becomes challenging. It's about finding the right partners, opening your requirements for qualitative feedstock, understanding how that will work in your design, and what is the interaction with other components. So that's typically something that you have to experiment with, learn and iterate. And I think that's also our approach in Going Circular. We say it's really about co-creating and about validating.
Yeah. So how do circular supply chains really differ from traditional supply chains?
Yeah, that's also but maybe back to what you say, what's between linear, something really taking, something you design, you use, and you throw it away. And that's literally a linear process. And if you look at a more circular value chain, you're looking at, okay, how do all systems or interactors or manufacturers or supply chains interact? So if also in the example you already gave, how could you design out waste? So what are you doing with your waste? And examples, industrial symbiosis, you could say, okay, output of a factory could be an input for another factory. So then you talk about interconnecting systems or supply chains. Then the second element we already discussed, so that's the more the input side. What kind of materials are you using? Secondary materials, already used materials, or even natural resources. In a sense, that could be regenerative. And then, of course, it's a very good example, also back to the industrial symbiosis, where is your, instead of creating value or waste, in a linear supply chain, you're looking at how to create value from waste. And that's also something you typically see in a circular supply chain. And so basically, and I think a last important element is linear supply chains very much optimized on cost and efficiency and reliability, on quality. And that's not always happening in, let's say, in a circular world. You really have to be agile, flexible. Maybe you need a little bit more inventory. Maybe you need a different way how you source. So those are key elements that you have to take into account.
Yeah. No,
and that makes it also complex.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry. I mean, supply chains are already complex as they are right now and global. But it's a very good point that you say, supply chains are very much optimized for costs, to make sure that you get the cheapest components for whatever you're building. Mm-hmm. Often this means outsourcing. Globally. So aside from, or maybe within the framework of redesigning this entire process to not have an optimal or cost optimized supply chain and moving towards a value creating supply chain, if you can put it that way, what are the biggest hurdles that you see?
Short-term focus. So what you're saying, we're optimizing for cost. So what's the business case for this? We only know if we see the whole system, how we could create value with all the different partners. So that's one major barrier. Then you could say assets. You were discussing about in and outsourcing. You have to look at from a collaborative partnership way of working. So is that in place? That's quite a barrier. Then of course capabilities. Skills, workforce, can you repair, can you remanufacture, can you reverse logistics, all those kinds. So really hands-on skills.
Maybe so also compliance in the supply chain. So if you So that if you offer something in terms of mobility as a service, who will then finally deliver the service and how do people get paid for it? So you trace back in the supply chain, what is the impact of the change and who will still benefit from it? So if you look at those supply chains, you can sometimes compare also that there is an opportunity for a partner in the supply chain to say, okay, hey, we see that we can be winning here. We can create more margin. We can go to a value-based business model. But there sometimes is also a cost for one of the other players. And of course, that's a big hurdle because they will block anything if they say the risk is too big. If you look at those barriers that Christiaan mentioned or this compliance part, what we try to do with companies is to really go beyond that risk. So we identify the risk, but we really also look for where is the opportunity for a new revenue stream, for something that would compete with this optimized cost, and saying where is the value for whom to go circular.
So the benefits for all the people involved, and that's quite a hurdle. That takes a lot of time, effort, trust in collaborating. Who's going to take the initial cost? Do we see this as an overall business case or benefit for everyone involved? Or are we optimizing indeed on one manufacturing plant, factory or something, or one company?
Yeah, now, there are a lot of things to think about if you're even considering going to a circular supply chain as short-term focus, sure, assets. I mean, yeah, there is things like stranded assets at some point. If you rethink your supply chain or your production, that there are assets that will lose value or will not be able to be used anymore. What do you do with them? Can you sell them? Can you turn them into something that creates value for you? I think this was actually the case for Renault in this remanufacturing case. And yeah, having the right capabilities. I mean, we see manufacturing that reskilling, upskilling is a very big topic in general already, even without thinking about going circular, especially in digitalisation topics and artificial intelligence. So all of this then basically comes on top of that. And I can imagine, just asking for your opinion here, I can imagine that with all of that going on and all of these kind of extra things, assets, capabilities, upskilling or reskilling, that it's hard to really go circular if you don't have a real business case behind that.
Yes and no.
Okay, that's promising.
Nobody says it's easy, but that's also in a linear world. At the end, it's there is a business case if you want to make it financial, but we also should look beyond that. What's the impact? Do you have environmental impact? Do you have societal impact? And looking at how could we create value for all those people involved and not create it on a single level. And already what you're saying, if you talk about stranded assets, sounds very negative. You could also, if you think it through, what we like to do is both on strategic and pragmatic level, you could already say, okay, how can we use that asset in a different way? Can we use it as a repair site, a remanufacturing site? Is it a hub for one of our key logistical activities, etc., etc.? So in that sense, you could create different business cases. There is no single business case.
No, because what we see, typically we see, you can say, okay, that cost savings, that's the first part for the business case. There's a lot of efficiencies to gain if you eliminate all waste, if you reuse resources that you already have. Then you can say, okay, there are some cost efficiencies. Then we see opportunities in the top line growth. So we see that you can attract new consumers or customers, that you can grow new or adjacent markets. So we see that there is a benefit there. But I think the business case is also relevant in terms of risk mitigation. So for instance, based on the extended producer responsibility, so everyone is expecting to either get fines or pay extra costs. And then the challenge is, can you prevent having these extra costs? Or all the whole geopolitical discussion that you say, what if tomorrow overnight you don't have access to resources? Then it would be great if you have an alternative scenario that will keep you going for the short term before you can really close the loop. So I think in this risk mitigation, the part of the business case is also something that we see more often now because there is so much uncertainty.
Yeah. No, I understand. Yeah, a lot of things to consider here, but it's absolutely possible, even if you don't think about this from your own perspective, or your own supply chain perspective. I recently read it was also an article, I think it was shared by WEF, um, about actually a Dutch startup that was recycling the nacelle of a windmill. So basically, it was a pilot project. I'm not sure if they paid for it, but they took the nacelle of an Austrian windmill that was at the end of its life cycle and turned it into a tiny house. And they do these things with the blades of the windmill as well. By the way, nacelle is the housing where the blades are attached to. So it is absolutely possible to just think outside of this box and try to make new things with whatever is left instead of letting it go to waste.
Yeah, maybe Christiaan, it's nice to share something about the circular solar surface, because that started with the idea that PV panels weren't easy to recycle. So you could say if we transition to green energy, then we are indeed creating a new problem. Would you like to elaborate a bit on that? I think it's a nice project to share.
Yeah, I think, before we go there, you triggered me. It's also important that you already upfront design, preferable how your, let's say, value chain or ecosystem will look like, including your business case. Because otherwise you're sort of surprised. I suddenly have something that's now a waste. What can I do with that? And that's difficult. But for the circular solar service project, we were looking at all the PV waste. So solar panels, solar systems, and specifically in South Africa in a township called Galicia, where there's a huge problem with power cuts. There's no access to energy or limited. Same, by the way, for housing, water, education. And what we try to do is with all kinds of partners is setting up a whole value chain and saying, okay, what if we take discarded solar panels, which still have let's say for 80% instead of 100% of the solar intake and output as well. If we collect them, check them on quality, of course, should be all compliant, all safe. Then we're looking at how could we install this on schools to provide energy for students so they can really, they have access to education. And also to entrepreneurs in the same township. So then you provide jobs, you avoid waste, and you can only do this if you look at the business case, if you look at, okay, what's the business case for everyone involved? So for the installers, for the school, for the entrepreneurs, for the recycler, etc., etc. And I think that's a very nice example where you reduce waste. You're using longer your solar panels. Instead of 10 years, you try to maximize to 25 years, provide jobs and energy for people who don't have access to energy. And that means also a future.
As a super nice example and a good story where there's really a societal impact as well, not only in your supply chain or in your business model, but on society as a whole, which is great if you can consider that in what you're doing. But I noticed, Christiaan, that I piqued your interest with this design topic. So let's maybe turn to that a little bit. There actually are some studies that the report that product design counts for about 75% of manufacturing costs and about 80% of environmental impact. So that would actually mean that decisions made before production even starts, so design decisions, can actually make or break circularity. So how can smart product design drive sustainability and reduce waste?
I would say that
Sandra,
maybe that's the easiest part, because it takes a long time before it's been implemented. But if you say we design products in a way that they indeed are easy to disassemble, that they can be repaired, that you can reuse parts of them again in different ways, that you upcycle them. We see a lot of energy there in terms of people getting enthusiastic about doing that. But then still in between, we have to make sure that we clean up the waste streams that we are currently still producing. But I think in that design part, there is a lot to be gained. And I think there's a lot of creative solutions also. So if I look at that headset, I'm not wearing it now, but in the headsets, I think in the repairability. There was a study done in 2022 or so by a lot of these electronics. They are designed for obsolescence. We say so they have a short lifetime. and there are now also startups that design electronics for long lasting lifetime, so for extreme durability. And that includes that you repair them by yourself, that you can take them apart, that the battery is not glued into the speakers, that you can exchange your mic. And of course, you can imagine that's a simple calculation to make if you can be efficient there in terms of using less materials, because you design it in a way that you don't need any extra waste. Then you design it in a way that it can be disassembled. Then you can also design it in a way that it can be repaired. There's in each step of that design process, there's a lot to be gained. And maybe that's also a good way to start to make it small again, Maxime, because you say it's really complex. Indeed, going circular will tick a lot of the boxes of your business model. It will tick the capabilities, it will tick the partnerships, it will tick your revenue streams, and as well as your value propositions. But in thinking about what can I in my design change so it can last longer, or it can be used longer, I think that's a nice one, as well as the lowering the resources that you need. So if you can say we make it thinner, smaller, miniaturize the design. And I think just the basic one is the whole discussion on USB-C cables to charge your electronic devices. Yeah, so that's already eliminating in the basic footprint of a product part of that footprint, making it smaller. Because you don't need a cable for every.
Yeah, it is one of the good things that the European Union has done. Setting a standard for a cable here. No, you're absolutely right, and I think this kind of also brings us full circle again from what we've talked about until now. You know, if you have planned obsolescence, that will, and if you want to change planned obsolescence, of course, that changes your entire business model from make, take, waste, literally, to okay, how can I get more value from repairing or substituting these kind of elements. And I think probably one of you were talking about headsets. Probably one of the more famous examples here is Fairphone.
Sure.
I think. I still remember vividly, you know, my very first mobile phone was a Nokia 3410, I believe, the light blue one. You could throw it on the street from the top of a skyscraper and nothing would happen. But what I remember vividly is, you know, sometimes the thing wouldn't work and, you know, you just take it apart, take out the battery, put the battery back in, and everything was solved. I mean, I'm sitting here with my two iPhones, actually, one private, one for work, and this is absolutely impossible with these phones. Everything is soldered shut. No, this will touch.
But it's interesting, because you see in smartphones, I think that's already very visible. You have this whole new supply chain with repair services. So in the streets, I come across these small stores that don't even do it in a certified way. And going back to that Renault example, typically you could say in the old days, Renault would just sell the car, and then a dealer network would take care of it. And then in the second-hand market, it would go into the not certified network of car repair services. And I think if you compare that to the smartphones, you also see that happening. And the question for manufacturers is, of course, what is going to be my role in that play? Am I going to be part of that? Am I going to enable that? Am I going to secure, for instance, in terms of if I enable certified repair, then I can also extend the warranties. And that could maybe be a preference for consumers to say, I would like to have this solution, this product. But you can also say, hey, we just stick to what we do best. We manufacture it and we leave it to the ecosystem to mature that whole repair and recycle loop. And then we just source recycled materials, and that's also a way to go circular.
And what, if I can add, what if, and more the customer side of it, what if you offer something as a service? So why do you have two phones? I could also offer you a mobile service. So I keep ownership of your mobile. I'm making sure you can always call, do your things, and take it back. And ensuring that you both have a high satisfaction. It always does the job. And in the other hand, we ensure that it works, it will be upgraded, will be maintained, etc., by reducing the amount of waste. It's about 1.8 billion phones a year. That's, I think, introduced. Something like that. It's crazy, new phones.
Yeah, that's a crazy amount. No, you're right. I mean, like the sharing economy, which has been touted to take off for a very long time now. Still a little bit of work to do there, I think. But yeah, it's true. I mean, in my entire life, for example, I've owned one car, which was probably 20th hand or something. I really don't know. It cost less than my laptop. I had it for 2 years or something. I was in Germany when I lived there. Uh, but yeah, no, I live in a city. I live in Vienna. I don't need a car. It's absolutely not needed. The infrastructure here is fantastic. I can call an Uber or a taxi. I can do car sharing. All of these things are possible. But it's more of a mindset change, I think, especially in
Yeah.
very specific topics.
Yeah.
For example, in Germany, there's this debate ongoing, also for many years already, to have a cap on speed limits everywhere on the highway. As you
Mm-hmm.
know, Germany is famous for having long stretches of highway without a speed limit. And the most heard argument against it is, oh, but my freedom. There you have to think, okay, maybe I can get someone on the podcast here to discuss this, because
Yeah.
I'm always
Yeah.
super surprised. But your freedom is what, going 180 on the highway? I mean, I have a different idea of freedom personally, but no, I think it's a mindset change as well. And it's maybe a very good follow-up question. I mean, in your day-to-day, this is also what you're doing, not only designing these new business models and these supply chains, but also coming up with ways to, on the one hand, change the mindset within a company, I presume, and convince internal stakeholders. There is always a little bit of friction there if you want to radically
Mm-hmm.
change something internally, especially the business model. So, what, in your opinion or from your experience, are some of the most effective ways to win over key stakeholders internally and get a real buy-in from circular economy or for circular economy initiatives?
Yeah, maybe we can highlight also the way we do it with circular business experiments, already mentioned. And it all starts with also behavior and personal engagement. So we are always looking at what is the business or commercial goal and also the impact goal, if there is. So we really ensure that there is also, let's say it's very traditional, top-down engagement. Because you have commitment to your stakeholders, your employees, to your shareholders, to anyone, and that's always also financial. We can not neglect that. So that should be a very convincing argument. You could call, what's the business case for this? And what we always also do is seeing, okay, where is the, let's say, more the personal link or the organizational link to it? You could ask the question, what's driving you with regard to circularity? You can do that on an organizational level and then come to a sort of common goal or purpose and saying, okay, this is important for us. And very often if you ask that, both individuals or organizational level, doesn't matter if you're talking about C-level, workforce level, any level, you see a very strong connection if you really have the discussion. So what makes us tick or what makes us positive and wake up and go to work? And that's very often non-financial driven, and that's related to, let's say, environment, circular or societal goals. And we try to connect that with the really with the business goals, both top down and bottom up. And then what already Sandra is saying, ensuring that you make it small. So if we say different business, of course we are not introducing a fully new business model and throwing away the linear model. That's not possible. So it's a step-by-step approach, and we always look at a different perspective. We look at from what we call desirability perspective. What does the customer market really want? Like you're saying, convenience. Okay, if that's important, and sure, that's is in the product, or then we're looking at it from a viability perspective. So where's the money? What's in for the business? Then we look at from an technical or feasibility perspective. So that's all about the product, materials, supply chain, manufacturing part of it. And we are also looking from an impact perspective. So is this business model really having a better positive impact on the other, also related to, of course, the company goal. And that's and then we make it very small. So then we say, okay, what are the key risks concerning those elements? And very often those are opinions and not facts. And then we're sorting this out. So in your example, if you say, yeah, in Germany, convenience or freedom is very important. Okay, let's see for who is that important and why is that important. And we can do that with very small tests to see, okay, what are the drivers there? Or we can do a very small test on, so how would reverse logistics supply chain look like? You don't have to suddenly scale that. Or how does the new business rationale, the financials look like in scenario A, B, or C, etc. And that's why we do step by step, continuous learning, and also ensuring that the people involved are engaged and keep on engaged. So cross-functional, both top-down and bottom-up.
Yeah, so that compass, I would say, that we use that compass to collect facts, to collect evidence, so that you can really make an informed decision. But I like, Christiaan, that you started with that personal note, because we rarely come across people that say, I want to leave the world worse than I found it. If you ask them, what if the sales of your cash cow triples? Are you then adding to the problems that we are already facing? Or are you adding to the solutions that we look for? And then, of course, people would like to leave a legacy. And indeed, I think that short-term shredder is sometimes really dominant. But if you can have a short moment to let them envision the first small step forwards and saying, okay, let's do an experiment. Let's see if we can make that happen. Then it's not only about collecting proper business measurements, requirements, data, but it's also making you feel good. And although in business to business, it's always really, we tend to think that we make rational decisions. However, we're all still very human. And we know that humans, that emotions drive our decisions and then we rationalize them. So if we can tap into that, what is your role in business? How can you help solve really straightforward challenges, problems that we are faced with? And only in your circle of influence. You don't need to completely change the world, but we all have a circle of influence that we can positively influence. So we also make it really personal and small, again, in that perspective.
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense to start small and not trying to reinvent the wheel again, coming back to what we discussed earlier. Now with a lot of initiatives on the European level, EU Green Deal, similar initiatives, the next decade might actually turn out to be pivotal for European manufacturing, also in terms of circularity. So what are the trends that you're seeing right now, and how do you see circularity evolving in the next couple of years? Are there any major shifts to expect in the industries that could be leading the way? How do you see this evolve?
Yeah, one of the or trends, or you could of course say the digital, or AI, or blockchain, or digital product passports. Transparency on the whole value chain is always a topic. Digitally really can help to accelerate. Although we have to be careful with the rebound effect. If everyone is using AI, what does it mean from a carbon footprint? But at least this is one of the key enablers you see in both on the European manufacturing and supply chain that could help to accelerate, of course. And then also what we already mentioned, the way are we going more to an European footprint, shorter supply chains, that would help also in circularity. It would also maybe help in, let's say, in a geopolitical environment, to put it like that. But that could, although it's very hard, of course, but we have to rethink to our supply chain and manufacturing footprint. So that will be a trend as well. Are we going to more regional, localized, and is that feasible also?
Back to the data part, so that's enabling. Sorry to interrupt, but back to the data part, I think it's both enabling benchmarking, because there is more transparency and reporting. You can distinguish the leaders from the laggards, if you will, and that will have an impact. But it's also about traceability of resources. So you can, if you know where certain resources are and what is the state that they're in, then you can also think about how to design to collect them in a way that you can reuse them again. So I think the data will enable different changes in going circular.
And then maybe something we already said about the capabilities. We really need capabilities workforce, people who can repair things, remanufacturing, etc., etc., repurpose. And yeah, that's quite a scarcity in knowledgeable people. So I also expect the trend there. So less people like us who talk and more people who really can do.
That's necessary. Less talking, more
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
No, so maybe it's a combination of things like you mentioned, the European footprint. This is in line with reshoring or nearshoring, plus then repairing, repurposing, and creating value out of what is usually discarded.
What's already there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sandra Christiaan, last question for you. If I'm a listener right now and I would like to get started with circular economy, whether I'm in manufacturing or not, whatever my role, are there any books, podcasts, websites, documentaries, if you had to pick one that you think, hey, this is one that you really need to see or read or listen to, what would it be?
Yeah, so I do here the Admiral's Rule. Although it's been published in 2015, but Christiaan is an author of a very practical workbook with a 10 steps approach to go circular. And he wrote that together with two colleagues. And I think based on that, one of the other authors is Nancy Bokke. She's a professor in Maastricht University, and she is also the initiator of a database with great examples. So that's Circular X. So I would recommend the work done by my colleague, but also the spin-off of that. That's Circular X. It's just a public database that you can check for inspiration in your own sector from around the globe, small and big companies, just to get inspired. And that's there's new cases, well, not every day, but a very recent case as well. So it's constantly being updated for you to go to. So that would be my two tips, if I'm allowed.
Okay, so that's Circular X, and the book was called also Circular X.
No, it's called Circular Business. Collaborate and circulate. Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, there it is. So
for viewers,
this is the promo,
on YouTube. This is, no,
I would go to a repair cafe. I wouldn't read and really I would go two things: go in nature, connect for yourself, and say, okay, what's my role? And for me personally, nature helps. Take some silence, space, and say, okay, what can I do here? And very practical, I would go to, for example, repair cafe. There are many of them, and see how does it really work to make something out of what's already there.
Fantastic. No, those are super nice tips, especially when I ask for books and podcasts and you come up with nature and repair cafe. I love that. Super. No, but the repair cafe is also very hands-on, and we just, as you know, we ended up with less talking, more doing. So that is absolutely in the line of us being go-getters and making circularity reality and not a theory. Sandra Christiaan, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a really interesting talk. And yeah, I think that we did achieve, well, maybe not great changes, but at least great ideas today.
Let's hope that sparks a bit of action with the listeners. Thank you for having us, Maxim. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Maxim.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like what you're hearing, make sure to subscribe to The Art of Making on the podcast platform of your choice. We're also more than happy to hear from you, so reach out through the EIT Manufacturing website, that is eitmanufacturing.eu, or find us on the usual social media channels. Take care and talk soon.